let's go.
That's right. We got another SMC3 JumpStart. I know that our carriers will be going through what I call the 3PL speed dating, just rapid fire meetings as they go through there. But it's nice to see everybody, and it's good in a consolidated approach to get in there and, meet with everybody and get that going on. I'm actually looking forward to the Salt Lake City one this summer up in Utah. I think that'll be a cool one.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a special event. Like there's no other event, to get that many key carrier and 3PL folks in the same place for 3 days. It's like LTL Mecca as far as all the right people.
Yeah.
And it's kind of been preserved. Like I know back in the day, even before I used to go, I think I started going in 2016, 2017. It used to be more just carriers from my understanding. And then as more 3PLs, especially those that were kind of, LTL facing, became a reality, then more and more started creeping in. And then there's always a contingent of, technology and service providers.
Your DDCs are pretty big there because all their business process optimization. You got your leans there and a lot of your outsourcing folks that are taking a portion of this from the carriers and helping them optimize a lot of these manual processes that they have to do. So
yep. But I think it would be absolute chaos if a bunch of shippers ever started showing up. There's a couple here and there based on like who's speaking typically. But
I would feel bad for shippers if they showed up because they would be inundated. I would like to see a larger influx of that at those shows to have more of like, your logistics service providers, your actual carrier partners or LTL carriers that are moving it, coupled with some shippers to get some of their feedback and kind of homogenize everything together. But I think it's a little easier said than done to get some of those in there. And then, if you do get the shippers that show up, you're going to get a lot of your tier one shippers there that can actually show up and go to events because it's not cheap traveling and getting out of there. So you'll have your big boys there.
Yep, I agree. Speaking of DDC, you mentioned them. That there's an industry highlight this week connected to that company. I don't know if you saw the one of our guest hosts that you had on the show a month or so ago, Mike Campese, just announced he's heading over and working with DDC. Pretty exciting.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a killer hire for them because, and I've worked with Mike for a long time. I've known him for a long time. He knows this industry inside and out. So he's got the relationships to be able to help them expand their footprint. But I think more importantly, from being in the bowels of the industry, he knows where he can really help them. And I think as you see the evolution of automation take place, I think for some of those folks like DDC and some of the other companies that are kind of outsourcing the billing for them, which is their strong suit, you're going to have to see that company evolve, right? Because as you get more tools like AI coupled with OCR and technology stacks get better that automate more, they're going to have to pivot their model and figure out where they're going to still really deliver value, right, and expand. Otherwise, just like any company, you can be really strong for a period of time, but if you don't keep up with the changes and evolutions of the industry, you can be left behind really quickly.
Yeah. And I agree. That's what's cool about DDC. They're, they have the BPO capabilities. They have a lot of people positioned, around the world that they utilize, but they're also very much on the tip of the spear with developing technology. And one of the things they put out, I believe last year, which I thought was really cool because it's kind of a combination of like old school tech but a current need, is the program to train and develop more engineers that are familiar with the AS400 system. That's so
that ain't going away. It's a gripe of everybody in the industry, right? You got your blocks, green screen, you got your hotkeys. What is my F12, F16 going to do this year? Yeah. And like you and I walked into this industry in a dock probably 20 years ago, right? And I walked into that 20 years ago, like this feels like the public library computer is better than this, but right, it's good enough. It does the job. And with as much volume as they're doing and intricacies, it would be so hard to rip that out of there. And we've seen carriers that have gone down that path, and they'll put like, hey, we're going to get this done in 1 year, or we're going to migrate over to Oracle, or whatever the new system's going to be. And boy, does it turn into a project much longer than that, with a bigger bill than they expect. Then you got to run parallel systems because you can't cannibalize one and just spin up another. You got to make sure everything's going well. And as
Yep.
you know, cost in LTL. You also got to look at that.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, this is kind of a good segue into another topic we were going to tackle. If we can all agree that AS400, type systems, or specifically that one, are here to stay. They've been around forever. They're not going anywhere. That's really like a very integral part of the LTL, technology infrastructure.
Yep.
And with all those different, not just the hotkeys and the way a user might interface with it, but there's a lot of carrier specific coding, customizations, acronyms, accessorial codes. Like there's a lot of differences carrier to carrier. And that's, we've talked about in the past, that's such a huge need going forward to kind of have like this new middle layer that translates everything and standardizes it, because even as you have, the LTL Digital Council and SMC3, NMFTA, a lot of these like, cornerstone organizations in the industry, putting stuff out there, modernizing, standardizing some of these APIs, it's not a one size fits all, and it probably never will, because there's so many major players when it comes to the carrier side in the industry. So we still have a ton of room to improve as an industry on just getting that middle translation, so that not every single TMS, shipper, 3PL, ERP, like all the different entities and platforms out there that are fed or need to be part of that tech loop that starts with the carriers and their AS400 systems. It's just not feasible for everybody to have a handle on every single carrier variation and customization. So what
Boy,
do you?
you wanted to get me fired up today on this whole thing, huh? Because like with us and where we sit as an ingestion layer, right? Like a technology vehicle that is also coupled with connecting to like a one-to-many API provider that is now connected into a one-to-many LTL provider network. You get, and we'll take Overlink, for example. I've seen OLE, I've seen ELX, I've seen ELEX. I have seen residentials where some carriers have one carrier has 7 different codes for residential. Now, I know why they have that, because there's different services nested under residential, right? Like drop and go, or just residential, or bring this inside, or throw away the pallet in the box with this, right? So I understand the need for it. But more importantly, when you're doing this, the translation layer is so crucial, because not every call is going to render the same result with the same carrier. And you know this, most shippers are doing business with probably 3 to 5 carriers that they actually ship with, coupled with they probably have more than that they're actually integrated to, that they don't provide business to, but they still show up.
Yep. Yeah, it's a bit of death by acronym. And you're right. I mean, it all rolls up to, like overlength or excessive length is a great one. It's it's a simple concept. It's okay, anything that's longer than your standard, traditional, easy to move, easy to handle LTL shipment. But then you have multiple tiers, when it comes to length ranges, and each carrier does that a little bit differently. Some are like just 8 to 12 and then 12 and over. Others have 4 to 5 different length tier increments. Once you start adding on, a location type like a residential and or a service level, yeah, the combination and the total number of codes just gets crazy. So I just bring everything back to, if I'm a shipper in the LTL industry, and let's say I'm new, I've stepped into a job, I'm managing $5 million in LTL spend. I work for a company that sells an assortment of different products, different commodities, different, characteristics and sizes of my shipments. I shouldn't need to know every single different carrier's acronym, code, definition, all the different variations. There should be something that kind of marries all that up in the back end. And then just all I'm concerned about is providing the the accurate characteristics and attributes of that shipment, of course. But yeah, it's a little bonkers sometimes. Even getting pricing proposals from different carriers where a lot of them will have, you know, instead of the word description of the accessorial, they'll just throw their code in there.
Yep.
That's almost it's very hard to interpret. It just makes evaluating pricing and even getting to that step of standing up a live published pricing program to use as a shipper, it just throws a bunch of flack in the way and makes it tougher.
Well, and then that's just the front end aspect of it, right? Like the rating call. And then as this shipment progresses through its life cycle, and this is where I hope eBOL lading solves some of this if the translation layer is there, because you'll collect that complete information on the front end. But if you don't, now you have a back end problem because of how you read or ingest the invoice if you can consume them and you're not just getting PDFs sent to you in the mail, right? Now you got charge code types that you have to map in, and depending on how that carrier invoices and sends you invoice data, that's all different too.
Right.
Like I've seen some ugly looking invoices, and this is where I love AI as a use case, because you could take that AI and turn something in that becomes more human digestible.
Yeah.
Right. Because I've seen some invoices that will just have item charge, item charge, item charge. And you can't figure out why the base rate is different, or like fuel's pretty easy to spot. But how you rated it versus how it's billed, right, comes back a little different too.
Yeah. Yeah. That messy middle, the class is pretty standardized, that's the same. Everyone, carrier to carrier, shipper to shipper. Fuel's generally the same. I mean, the structure of it, at least, you
Yep.
obviously have different, fuel
Table.
schedules,
Yeah.
different tables. But that messy middle of, accessorial codes, even in some cases, the way the line haul charges are displayed on an invoice on the back end, especially if there's any sort of dynamic pricing factored in, it gets messy. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
is there a company that you know of that just focuses on like just standardizing, all these different carrier codes?
I
Because
haven't
that's
I
neat.
haven't seen one yet, like on the pure rating side. And it's not to say they don't exist. They may,
Yeah.
right? There's a company that's pretty neat because of the rise of dimensionalizers, right? Like your Freight Snaps, your Cubiscans, and there's others out there. But it's a cool company called Pack IQ that is a
Yep.
cloud hosted company that translates and cloud supports these different dimensionalizers to be a one to many with different ERPs or TMSs so that you can just connect to them and ingest it. Now, while that does add a layer of additional cost to use the middleware, it cleans everything up, and it takes, companies out there that might not have a cloud supported version because they started a while ago, they're heavy on prem, and it allows you to connect to that and scale that offering across different endpoints that you have to connect to.
Yep.
What I don't know is of anybody doing that on the pure LTL rating side, other than one-off platforms that have to manage it on their own
Right.
and kind of work on behalf of multiple companies, is like you really become a de facto product company of APIs and just call out where you're seeing these deficiencies, and then you have to solve for them on your own, which is why I just haven't seen anybody out there that's doing this yet. And there may be, we may get comments in here, people shouting at us after the
Yeah.
fact that it exists, but
Well, I hope we do, and if not, that's a need. I mean, that's a whole that's not just a product. That's a whole company that
yep.
could be doing that. Because then when you get the middle layers, every TMS is going to have their own version of accessorial coding. And you're right. All that matters is when whether it's a rate quote on the front end or whether it's an LTL freight invoice on the back end, all that matters is when that customer pulls it up and they're looking at it, that they can make sense of, some semblance of standardized services and charges.
Yep.
And, if I were a 3PL, I can't invoice a customer, because they used, say, Estes on one shipment and then ABF on the next. I got to give them kind of a uniform like overlength code, or description. It can't just be parent child of the carrier. So
Mhm.
yeah, huge need for that.
Yeah, and it's nice. I know we work a lot on that and try to improve that because at the end of the day, we obviously have a lot of shippers in our platform.
Mm.
They don't care. They're like, I just want to get it right, right? So then
Yeah.
somebody else's problem becomes our problem, and we just got to work through it because we need to solve it on behalf of the shipper.
Yep. Yep.
So that's a big one for me. Segueing into other news, right? And it's been a long time, and it's hard to say it's a net new carrier coming into the arena. It is and it isn't, right? We had Jack Cooper LTL, which we've talked about on previous shows. We knew
Yep.
they were doing something was brewing. Well, between our last show and this one, it finally popped. The news has been out there. FreightWaves has covered it. You guys have seen it. But Jack Cooper made the acquisition of Standard Forwarding and has gotten into the game. So a little bit of a rebrand, but nonetheless, it is a net new LTL carrier, which I still love coming into the game because you've seen that outside of that, you've seen a lot of acquisition of smaller entities coming in between, what happened with GLS and the whole Mountain Valley, going back to Mountain Valley and who purchased them. You've seen what AAA Cooper's done by acquiring MME, DHE, and combining that AAA Cooper brand to more or less be a de facto national carrier, just missing that gateway into the Northeast.
Right. Yeah, I think as an industry, we have to be excited about this. If you look at, very optimistically how this could pan out, you've got this little Midwestern carrier, Standard Forwarding, that, has been around a long time. I
Mm-hmm.
think, I think if not 100 years, close to it. Family company back in the day, like they all were. And then 10 to 12 years ago, I believe they were bought by DHL and just kind of, from my outsider's view, just kind of put on a shelf and not a lot of activity. I've known a few people that have passed through that company, in different roles. But they just owned it and it existed. They
Mm-hmm.
had a little group of terminals. They are union. They have Teamster drivers. But it is exciting to think, okay, if you now have, the brain power of all these ex yellow and in a lot of cases ex roadway people that are still in the game. You got the resources of a much bigger, more transportation, road transportation centric company like Jack Cooper, and then you still have kind of this wild card piece of, what's still out there to capture from the Holland, uh, you know, the Holland stronghold in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan.
And,
There's
and and in my opinion, like from a pure operational perspective, that was really the shining star
yeah,
of those multiple brands of New Pin, Holland, Roadway, Yellow, and Redaway.
yep,
They did a terrific job up there. Did for a long time. It was reminiscent of when Central Freight Lines was crushing the Texas market. Right?
yep,
They just did
exactly,
a good job in their localized region.
yep, yeah. So it is kind of exciting. I think and we've all been guessing for a year plus now on what this looks like. We've, you can go see certain individuals' LinkedIn pages, and for a while they were saying Jack Cooper LTL. Now they've all converted to Standard Forwarding. They've had a little bit of a brand refresh, I've noticed. Looks like they still have a lot of work to do, on the website and just the customer facing systems and UI and everything. But again, good group of transportation, specifically LTL transportation
Mm-hmm.
execs there, some resources behind them. And now, if any, is probably a good time to jump back into the market.
Yep.
It'll be really interesting to follow them and see what they do in 2025.
Well, then outside of the Jack Cooper news, I think the big one everybody's wondering about, and I know I am because, from a volume perspective, they're the largest LTL carrier in the game, would be FedEx. They've been popping in the news a lot. right? Forever, that FedEx brand has been synonymous with the parcel end of it, and LTL is just another beast. Well, LTL operates extremely well for them. It looks like they're doing similar to what XPO did, where they're decoupling that to focus solely on LTL. At least that's the news that's broke. Nothing has actually happened yet. I get
Right.
why they would want to do that from like a shareholder value perspective, but it is going to be interesting to see how that progresses, how they decouple that. And I know the big like looming question for me with that whole deal is, as you decouple that today, the way I see it from the outside looking in, a lot of their, account executives or reps on the street are able to sell both products.
Yeah.
So as you separate that and you focus more on an LTL specific operation, where does your sales force come from? Right? These national carriers, and have upwards, depending on the national carrier, they could have 225 all the way up to 400 account executives out there that focus on, some variation of specialized services or just LTL. So
Yep.
it is going to be interesting to see as they decouple that, what they do with that. And it sounded like from their last call, they were going to probably put a good emphasis maybe on strategically working with certain 3PLs,
Yes.
right? I saw that from their earnings call, which, isn't a bad thing, but it tells me that maybe they'll be a little more reliant on a third party solution provider offering their solutions to the market while not having to take on such a large sales force, right? Which is another huge cost of a lot of carriers. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with FedEx, because they are
Yeah.
a beast. They run extremely efficient,
Right.
and that one I want to keep my eyes on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost unfathomable to think the largest LTL carrier in the market is essentially, going to become a startup now and the reason I say that is just, you know, those LTL executives haven't really had the control that they probably would have liked. Everything built internally, technology wise, pricing systems, all sorts of things is really built for the parcel industry. And I know there's been, on the administrative side, the back end, there's been a lot of just trying to fit these, square LTL pegs into a round parcel hole.
Mm-hmm.
So you have that much revenue, that many customers. How many terminals do they have now? Do you know? I know they've been one of the only carrier closing some down in the last couple of years, really, when others have been buying. But
Yeah, they did a little bit of LTL consolidation on the terminals, but it's not necessarily a bad thing because they probably
no,
had one of the broadest networks out there. And a
yeah,
lot of the terminal closures that they did do, were a lot of the smaller ones. And we've been there where you're at a smaller facility, the terminal manager is the sales guy, the operator. You have the drivers in those facilities that'll kind of hump their own freight and kick stuff on and off like a cross dock out here in Desert Center, California, where they'll take care of themselves.
yep. But no, what you mentioned, just the LTL focused, LTL centric aspect of what it's going to be going forward is going to be pretty cool to watch, because even at a terminal level, those terminal managers, they're really essentially selling and servicing all products, all services.
Mm-hmm.
So to have LTL, FedEx Freight only focused terminal management, I think it's really going to make the operations on the ground, really pick up, get to another level. The 3PL strategy that you mentioned,
Yeah.
FedEx Freight has a pretty strong existing like intermediary 3PL sales group carved out. But again, all those folks are still, they're selling international, they're selling all kinds of different services
Yeah.
currently. Um, and then the other aspect is, and I've experienced this many times in the past, when you're one of essentially two major parcel carriers, your field reps are everywhere. They're plugged into every
Mm-hmm.
shipper out there, or have been. It's like sometimes they flip flop. We're a UPS shop now, we're a FedEx shop.
Yeah.
But as a 3PL, bringing on a new shipper client, as I've done in the past, there was always this weird dance with, okay, who's their FedEx representative? can I run this through, my intermediary sales contact? Does it have to be with a local rep? So it always produced this level of fragmentation where,
A lot of bureaucracy when you work over there, going
yeah,
through
a
different
lot of
channels.
NDAs, a lot of
Yeah,
mutual NDAs, and splicing together, agreements and who's allowed to look at what. And,
yeah,
you know, uh, for example, if you're a 3PL and you generally are going to have like one Old Dominion contact, one XPO contact, like it's very simple.
hmm
But I remember in years past with FedEx, like if we had 10 different shipper accounts of ours that were using FedEx in some capacity, I might have had to deal with like 7 different people across those
yeah,
different accounts.
yeah.
So, yeah, I think
It
it'll be
almost
good.
feels like they're ran by their legal team. You know what I mean?
Almost, yeah.
Yeah. Which is always fun to work through. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see what happens with that. So we'll keep our eyes wide open because I think you and I both know that ain't a cheap purchase. So I doubt somebody's going to come in Daddy Warbucks style and be able to buy them. Right? Handful of companies out there that can have the money to buy that. Right? And you're talking like Amazon money to buy something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, but even at this point in time, I don't see that happening. I think I and this is probably the best scenario. They spin it off. It's LTL focused. Um, like I said, a lot of those, LTL and freight executives and leaders that are there now, they know what they need to do. They know what they want from a tool set, from technology. They know how they want to run their operations, and they've just been kind of handcuffed in the last several years to be able to execute that.
Yeah, and that's a good call that you make because on the back end of that, you see a beautiful, prevalent FedEx brand up front, but on the back end, there's still a lot of Watkins stuff going on back there. You know what I mean? Because they have a lot of layered legacy tech on the back end. So that's going to be a whole nother hurdle in itself with the decoupling is not just separating operating companies, but what the heck do you do from a technology standpoint? Right? Because so much of that from an account perspective, like when, and this, when you create a FedEx account, in a lot of the ways, you also have to have a parcel account, whether you ship parcel or not, to link the
Right.
two together.
Yeah. Specifically from an API technology
Yep.
perspective, you could be a 3PL that has one FedEx account and it's only freight, but yet you still have to have the parcel account, jump through all those hoops.
And you can't even resell parcel. You don't have a meter number. You're not approved for it, but you still have to have it.
Yeah. So yeah, it'll be cool to see. I guess in summary, it's like there's a lot of horsepower, if you go back even as far as the Watkins freight line stays. Um, we should maybe look at getting someone like a Jim Badovanak on the show in the future who was there, for 20 plus years. I think was early in the FedEx Freight roll up of all those companies. Be cool to get his perspective. But yeah, you've got this behemoth of an LTL provider. It'll be really, really cool to see what they can do when they're kind of unshackled from the parent company and just purely focus on LTL. I mean, and they're the biggest by a mile. Like they're
Yeah.
what, not 2024, I think was 9 billion plus. If you look at number 2, that's Old Dominion, they're between 6 and 7. But
Yeah, but we all know that's very strategic over there at Old D because they do a lot with very little. So when you look at volume and then you go over and look at margin, right,
oh
on the
right.
money you're making, which is all they care about, miles apart.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Totally
So
different, totally different yeah, profitability and yield strategy
yeah,
results. But
yeah, it goes back to Mr. Poland, one of your mentors. His commandments of LTL freight.
yeah, yeah. He's got those written on his whiteboard in the office. There's I feel like a lot of carriers are just starting to catch up to that or have been catching up, but they're just starting to consistently exercise that level of discipline.
Yeah,
Like where Todd has said for years, like no lane, no lane can be a loss leader. Like he's not going to price a whole account with only, a third of the activity or the lane mix profitable, and just, hey, we'll take the bad with the good.
Yep.
They're very disciplined in, even down to, individual shipment level. um Obviously, small little one-off lanes and here and there, that's a different story. But if there's any level of consistent business where they can quantify that in the cost model,
Mm-hmm.
it's got to operate. It's got to make money for
If it don't make dollars, don't make sense over there.
them. That's right.
Um, so yeah, so that's some good stuff on the carrier news that's been popping. The other thing I've noticed, at least traveling around, working with everybody seems to be pretty geared up and focused back on growth mode. I think it's fair to say the last 2 years have been a little rough. It's been more than stagnated. You've seen them maintain good pricing discipline. You've seen them focused on increasing revenue per bill, targeting the freight they want. I think you've seen them be fine with market share dips as long as revenue increased and they were static across, right? Because bill count wasn't growing. So
Yep.
they kind of augmented and did some different stuff. But I think most of them are really hammered. There's a lot of optimism in the space going forward. You've seen things like the industrial manufacturing index start picking back up again. So it'll be interesting to see what happens going into this year. And I'm bullish on it. I would love for it to pick up, right? As the industry picks up, the revenue and the money flows and everybody involved in it, makes a little bit more. And there's plenty of meat on the bone in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think really, if you look at the COVID era, and then, the YRC, the yellow closing era shortly after that, we're fully past both of those. And I think if you were to like cut those years out of the graph, we're kind of back somewhere in line with pre all that stuff happening. And
Yep.
now just time for, slow, steady growth. And the cool thing is every carrier out there has gotten tougher and leaner and smarter through navigating those difficult times, from 2020 to 24.
Yeah. And actually,
So,
Yahoo Finance put out a cool article on that, specifically on the LTL industry. You should check it out, where they're pretty bullish on it. And they're not the only one or analyst I've seen that's pretty bullish on LTL, probably for the next 2 to 4 years. So it'll be interesting. And it's so hard to like have your Nostradamus crystal ball outside of a couple years. You never know what will happen.
yeah. Yeah, you never know. There could be another black swan event or some crazy chaotic something that
The
that
one thing I will continue to trend, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a sign of the time, right? And when you look at the LTL industry, you have your common carrier, I'll call them LTL asset-based providers. Really, the industry is comprised of that top 10 to 15 that are hauling, 98% of the volume. I still see a lot of growth through acquisition or just growth by some of the smaller carriers not surviving through this as this tech play becomes larger, because there is still a lot of smaller carriers that aren't even plugged into a lot of these API aggregators and providers. They're missing out on business with customers because of that.
Yep.
And, I think it's just a sign of the times of the ones who leaned into tech versus the ones who did not. And it's put them behind the 8 ball, right?
Yep.
And it will continue to do so until they lean back into that. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens either through and I don't ever want to see a family owned company go out of business or lose their job, but I do definitely see a trend of further acquisition of these carriers in these smaller, rural, localized markets where they've done a good job. And they'll come in there and gobble them up for that terminal, that asset, and that book of business.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. And we've seen pretty recently three, regional acquisitions. If you go back to DC Logistics buying Mountain Valley back from GLS, you've got Moran bought RMX in Ohio, and then you've got here recently Pitt, Ohio bought Sutton Transport. So I think we'll see more of that, and it'll be interesting to see what that means. Like if we go as far as saying, if we look at the top 40 LTL carriers, that gets pretty, 30 to 40, that gets pretty small. Those carriers are
Yes, it does.
regionally focused. And like you said, the top, 10 to 12 really own most of the space. But I think we'll see a bit of a shift as like say even number 25 to 40 kind of maybe get acquired and get kind of scooped up and pulled into these larger regionals. I think we're gonna see a lot more of these like super regional type carriers, where someone like a Southeastern or an Averett really is that's the template right there. That's the leader. They're massive
Mhm.
carriers for not being fully national. And some of these little conglomerates of, just in the Pitt family, you've got Ross Express, Pitt, Dorn. Now Sutton is being absorbed into
Mhm.
Dorn. You've got, the Knight Swift three that we mentioned so far with DHE, with Midwest Motor and AAA.
And I don't think they're done yet. I think they're still
No.
licking their chops, looking for the next meal to eat.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that, say that top 10 to 12, we could see some of the LTL market get a little bit redistributed, and some of these, in the 12 to 20 spot are chomping at the heels, and they're buying other companies, and they're getting bigger and increasing their capabilities.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, let's segue here. We broke our carrier news. We dumped our thoughts out on this, right? We're armchair warriors over here, pure speculating.
Oh, we are, yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but the last time I got to see you was at your ULTL event, and it was my
Right.
first time getting to go. And thank you for inviting me out there. It was great to speak, to present at that. But more importantly, to really see a meeting of the minds and a bunch of different providers at different places in the industry from a service perspective coming together to really understand and unpack a lot of the stuff that we talk about, which is how do we grow, evolve, and get better with the changing times, right? So tell me a little bit about ULTL. You've been pretty hot and heavy on this. You did a great job putting on a good show and took me to a dinner up there in Arlington, Virginia, of which you had to pivot, right? That was a hard one because of what happened to poor Asheville, your home place where you were going to do this event. And I was looking forward to go there, and we had to pivot last minute, go to Arlington, and you put on a hell of a show and beautiful restaurant, rotating dinner. I got to, see the
Pivoting restaurant.
Pentagon and the DC Monument and everything up there, Lincoln Monument from right there. It was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been a just overwhelming to see, 3 events in, how it's progressed, the team that's helping me pull this off, the folks in the industry stepping up, like you mentioned the Asheville pivot. Yeah, we were set to go. We had venues paid for. It was happening in Asheville. And then last minute it was not due to the
Yeah.
weather and the flooding. So that's where Liz Ward stepped up, offered her space,
Shout out Liz Ward.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so we're just looking to continue that. I won't say growth, I'll say the quality, the potency of the events. There's no other place. Like it's a different event. It's not somewhere you go to get a bunch of meetings and
Very
be,
intimate. It's
yeah,
not 500 people, speed dating of meetings.
right, which has its own value, right? Like
Mhm.
just the accessibility of everyone, like we talked initially about the SMC3, like huge value to that. This is more like intensive, deliberately smaller group. There's not a lot of people going off and hanging out in the lobby and doing one-on-one meetings. There's no speed dating. It's all 40 to 45 of us in a room for 2 days, and there are some deep topics we go through. You
Mhm.
and Alex did a great session on what you guys are doing with My Carrier and just the digital end-to-end workflow of, I think we came out with a potential t-shirt slogan on that, save the pros.
That's right.
We had one carrier that like basically talked through and just transparently, showed how their IT security strategy works and where their backup servers are. We had another carrier leader talk about their recruiting plan, like how they're looking at, okay, as we move forward, it's harder to find, recruit, and specifically retain dock personnel, drivers, anybody really in any.
Even sales folks, you're seeing a lot of attrition right now
Yeah.
because you do have a transition of the aging legacy workforce, and depending on the carrier you work out there or view or look at, sorry, there's more or less of that, right? Where you're getting a lot of lifers that have been here 20, 30 years, and you're starting to get that attrition. And there's some excitement for that. You lose a little bit of that touch of that old school. They knew how it worked. They know it in and out. And you're getting a little more new school in there, a little more tech forward, tech centric, that can keep up and continue moving this beautiful industry in the right place as more of that is integrated into their understanding. I need to know how to sell in and around this as I work with customers.
Yep, that's a great point. And that's why, we recognize at ULTL the need for just better LTL training and content and reference materials. So looking back at kind of the first year and a half to almost 2 years of the org since I started it, each of these, each live event, each course, each program we did was kind of this siloed product in itself, and trying to get the consistent, engagement and participation and, registration was tough at times, like, because the events weren't cheap. So we decided for this year and going forward just to bundle everything into one membership. Now there are two different levels, two different accessorial, I guess, codes or levels for
Yeah.
it. But yeah, so we're going to have like a virtual only, which is all the online content, courses, trainings, as well as we're starting up a new thing this year. We're going to have monthly all hands meetings for the LTL industry. So every month we're going to do a call. Anyone in our membership can tune in and listen, get recordings of it, get material from it after. And that's going to be just breaking down relevant topics, breaking down the market, having folks like Scooter Sayers come in at times, talk through the public carrier earnings, just this continual focus for both people inside and adjacent to the industry. You talked about Yahoo Finance writing about the bullishness connected to LTL. There's a lot of folks that I talk to at times, and a lot of other people do, that are looking to invest significant money into these carriers and buy stock. So, just having this kind of, we'll keep our thumb on the pulse as far as, what we're seeing and the different dynamics in the industry. And we're just going to have this new channel to share that. So that's like the virtual only. And then the all in pass, basically, you can either pay it in one shot or you can pay it monthly to spread it out. It's everything I mentioned on the virtual side, and then access to all these live events too.
Yeah. So unpack for me a little bit the U of the ULTL, right? The understand portion, where, as I understand it, if I'm a local account executive or I'm in LTL and I want to progress my knowledge, right? That's part of it, right? You could take actual courses from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah, like, let me know what that part of it is. Unpack some of the stuff that you're focused on from an educational perspective, and maybe what some of these folks get out of it.
Yeah. So one great example, we have a partnership with Ward, where anytime they hire a new sales rep, specifically those from outside the industry, they run them through kind of our LTL 101 course. It's called Building an LTL Brain. So it's all about just breaking down, like most of what we talked about, especially with the different accessorial codes and all these different acronyms. That's in general like how the LTL industry is kind of taught and communicated. So we try to like really boil things down to first principles. That's where the space, time, and risk concept originally came from. Instead of getting caught up on all these individual line items and charge types and service types, if you know upstream why it's there, essentially what's driving it, from a bigger category. Is it space driven? Is it time driven? Or is it risk for a carrier? It kind of builds like the lattice work of an LTL framework in your head.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's less about, very granular examples, and because you can't cover all that. You're going to see a million different examples just spending 1 year working in the industry. It's more about really backing into those like baseline concepts where this is the foundation, and here's why we have, the second, third, fourth layers built on top of that.
Yeah. And I love that from this perspective. I mean, I had to learn trial by fire, take my lumps, working in operations, sales, and doing it the hard way, for lack of a better term, because there wasn't a class I could take. So I
Yeah.
love what you're doing there. But if I'm selfishly thinking about just me as like an account executive or somebody new to the industry, this is a beautiful space to be. You can make a lot of money and you can separate yourself from the pack pretty easily just by your knowledge, right? And like when I sell and always have sold, the reason I think I've been able to be successful is because I can get people to like, know, and trust me. But
Yep.
they have to, in order to get the trust, right? That's not just because they like who you are or that, their kid's baseball game is on Tuesday and see how little Jimmy's doing. It's because you know what you're talking about. And for lack of a better term, you're not a moron. And you could educate them and you become a thought leader, which makes you a very dynamic seller. The more you know, the more dangerous you become.
Yep. I agree. And it's both, and it's caring on the personal side as well as being dangerous with industry knowledge and capabilities. And I feel like in the past, those that were a little more well versed on the technical side or the true knowledge, they're hidden away in carrier pricing departments, or they're kind of in the back office. So yeah, this is really just an attempt to, it's to grow and further the LTL community and build your network. Like,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, just because we're not having, bunch of speed dating and little one-on-one meetings, there are some serious relationships that come out of this, and a lot of, business and deals that end up getting struck from people that I've met at these events in the
Yeah.
past.
Well, if you look at somebody like a Old Dominion who does a really terrific job, where do they make all the salespeople go before they can hit the streets?
Probably Todd's office.
Nah, I don't think he's got time for that. They make them hit the dock. They make them understand the operation.
True.
What do we do? How do we move the freight? And why do we do such a good job of it?
Yep.
Right? They
Yep.
make them go out there. And that's pretty impactful, right? When you know how it flows internally and what's good, what's bad, what hinders their job, right? When you go out there and sell on the street, you can better educate your customer and help them fix problems. Because I know one thing for sure. If you don't help your customer solve those problems, they will become your problem.
Yeah.
For better, worse, right, wrong, or indifferent.
Yep. That's a good way to
So,
put it. Yeah, it's not about pushing the problem off. It's pushing the solution further downstream to your customer so they can solve it for themselves.
amen. Well, heck, Curtis, we just filled up a whole hour just like that, man, riffing right through it.
We did it.
So
Enjoyable as always, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in 3 days down in the big ATL.
yep, we'll catch up. I've made a commitment to try to be as dry as possible. And what I mean by that is I don't want to be drinking every night. You know what I mean? 10 cocktails. I'm going to try to limit myself, control my controllables.
That's smart. That's smart. You'll thank yourself on day 2 for sure.
Well, on day 3, when I got to fly to Chicago and do more work. So the train ain't stopping in Atlanta. We got to keep it moving.
That's right.
So, well, hey, thanks for coming on. Another great show. Let's go ahead and cap it out, and we will see these folks, same bat time, same bat channel next episode.
Let's do it.
All right.